Hi guys, my name is Kaz Danazon with Kraz Productions, and today we have another dev space here with the infamous Tony Barnes. How are you doing today, Tony?
It's on the West Coast. So I'm just shaking off. I'm just waking up.
Why don't you give us a little bit of in-depth information about who you are and what you do for a living?
Holy cow. Well, let's see. The high level is I'm a 40-year video game veteran. I started making games when I was 12, so you can do the math on that. And I made lots of games and franchises over many, many machines. Started out with the Apple II in school, but really my first games were shipped on the Atari. So I'm a big Atari head, and I consider that my roots
Okay.
all the way up until even recently on the Atari VCS and working on next gen systems like the Xboxes and PlayStations and Switches and anything I can put my wares on. At a high level also, I back in the old days when you wanted to make a game, you had to make it, soup to nuts. So even though I kind of like as a kid wanted to be I wanted to do comic books or make cartoons, animations. One of my heroes was Ray Harryhausen. So I really wanted to do all that. But, stop motion animation is labor intensive and very long. And when they put computers in schools, it was like, oh, wow, I can move this dot across the screen in 1/100th of the time that it takes me to move a character across the screen. So I'll just uh I'll just lean in on this and see where it goes. And that was 1983. And by 1985 I was a professional game maker and have been ever since.
Okay.
Yes.
Um, if you don't mind me asking you, the first question that I have on my list that's sitting in front of me here, how did you really decide to get into development? What's something that lured you into the process? Like what really piqued that childhood spark that made you say, "Hey, I want to make this."
I mean, in general, like even to this day, I I just have to create, I have this in me where I hear something or I see something and I want others to see and hear it too. And so that's kind of where, like, being a dungeon master when I was a kid, and comic books, and like I said, the stop motion animation, even hand drawn animation. Um, that's where it all came from. Is just having having these thoughts in my head and wanting someone else to experience it. And like I said, like Ray Harryhausen was my heroes. George Lucas was one of my heroes growing up. Prince was one of my heroes growing up. All of these people are kind of multi-talented, and from the outside looking in, they're the type of people that didn't wait for someone to give them permission to do something. They just said, I have this in me and I have to get it out. And I look at that and I was like, that's like me. I have it in me and I have to get it out. And when I first started making games in school, I grew up dirt poor. Like I admired poor kids because I was so poor. And I would use the computers at school, given in any time I could get a hold of it. And when I finally learned how to kind of make games, even simple, really simple games, the response from people was so positive. It wasn't like everyone was like, "Oh my God, this is the greatest thing on the planet. We love you." Ah, ah, ah." It was just that people were interacting with the thing that I made, and the majority of them seemed to be having fun and wanted to have more of it. So that feedback loop, it's I mean, it's kind of selfish, but I put out games so that people can enjoy them, so I can enjoy them enjoying it.
I got you. It might actually bring you some joy to hear. Now, I won't say any names, but I have spoken to some people with Atari SA, and I will, like in private, and I will tell you that some of them are actually very fond of you and your work, and especially with BPM Boy, which of course we'll get into a minute. But I'm pretty sure that would bring you a little bit of joy to hear.
Oh,
Um,
every little bit brings me joy.
I do want to go a little off topic for just a second here, and I hope this doesn't come off as offensive, but there's a reason why I bring it up. One of the reasons why I got into the Atari VCS is because of its exposure to independent developers. And if not for the Atari VCS, I never would have otherwise heard of. To be completely honest with you, I never knew who you were until I got into the Atari VCS and I started looking into your resume. And by the way, you got a lucrative career. I'll give you that right there. I actually grew up playing the Strike series, Jungle Strike, Urban Strike, Nuclear Strike. I had no
Mhm.
idea you were a part of that. You played Secret Agent Ego, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So like that's really cool, first of all. So I just want to say like congrats on that. That's pretty cool. And one of the offhand questions I wanted to ask you, what was it like working with that series?
Um, so yeah, like yeah, I've been around quite a bit. Yeah, I'm probably one of the more prolific designers out there. Certainly, Surprise and Black, and certainly the most prolific Black game developer out there in general. Um, but like, it's interesting because I was doing other things, and a friend of mine, who actually was co-founder of Visual Concepts, contacted me and said, "Hey, Electronic Arts is looking for someone that has like a programming background and design, and maybe could do some pickup on pixels or something. Do you know anyone like that?" And it's like, oh, well, duh. Um, I know that guy. And Electronic Arts, growing up in the Bay Area or growing up in general in the 80s, there were a handful of companies that was just like, holy cow, I'd love to work with these people. And like, LucasArts was one of them. Electronic Arts, I grew up on their games, Capcom, and it's funny, I've actually worked with each one of them in some capacity. But when my friend said, "Hey, let's EA is looking for someone," I was like, okay. And I, interviewed, and God, it's funny. The actual interview and mechanics of all that are a blur to me now that I think about it. But yeah, I was EA, what was it, 91 through 95. And when I first got there, there was a bunch of engine stuff being done for the Strike series, because that kind of thing had never been done before. And yeah, excuse me. Mike Passine, the engineer, he, he coded the engine, so to speak, more like a framework, because actually everything is hand coded in Strike. Like if you're running around and you encounter a little bad guy, I probably sat down and wrote a little piece of assembly code to make that guy move around and look at you and think about you. There's very little real AI as we think of it today.
Okay.
Everything is a set of code that's actually from me or John Manley, who's like the co-director of the Strike series. We sat down and hand placed all of the tiles, every little bad guy, and it's all hand coded. And we play it to death to make it seem more reactive than it really is. Uh, but like, yeah, it was interesting because when I first got on board, there were a whole bunch of other games that they had going action wise, and I jumped in on those because I'm really an action console kind of person, I guess. Nowadays it's kind of a blur between what's a console game and what's a PC game. Like
Right.
it's all, there's just a happy medium, which I like. And so yeah, when it came to Strike, it was like it actually started as this thing called Beirut Breakout, and it's obviously influenced by Choplifter. I don't know if people see the other influences, like Zaxxon. Um, my mother loved isometric games, so I'm kind of naturally drawn to them. So there's a lot of anything that's ISO, I kind of jumped on, and that was the engine that was being built was at this isometric angle to
Right.
fake 3D. So that really was in my wheelhouse. It was like, oh, action shmup, well, shooter, because we didn't call them shmups back then. Um, Action shooter that's isometric, cool. And because we could go, in any direction, it just it didn't make sense to make it like a like Zaxxon, where it was forcing you down a tunnel.
Right.
Um,
That more.
and so from there it evolved into the thinking man shooter, as we used to call it. Where it was something where we wanted players to feel like they could approach problems, within the confines of the game, approach problems however they wanted to. And so I guess it was kind of, I wouldn't say sandbox, but semi-open.
Right.
It was probably one of the first games that was like that. Certainly the first shooter that was like that. Up until that point, everything was R-Type or Zaxxon or Space Invaders in some respect.
Right. I mean, I in the 90s, I was born in 91, and I grew up playing a lot of Nintendo games. It wouldn't be until I hit my teenage years that I started experimenting with Sega. And I've mentioned this before in a previous interview, but I'll die on the hill that Sega is more superior for the 90s at least. But
Mhm.
I don't want to try to cut off this part of the topic here, but we're on a time limit, so I want to go ahead and move back into the original questions that we have. Is that okay?
Sure, sure. Yeah.
Right?
I'm sorry, I babble a lot,
No,
so
you're fine. Like that's
whatever.
perfectly fine. As you can talk all you want. That's what this
Mhm.
whole thing is about. I want to try to get your experiences and because this helps me kind of see like how it was before I even existed. You know what I mean? So like I love that type of stuff, and I'm sure people watching also enjoy it too. But one of the cool things also about the Atari VCS is that it combines modern with retro gaming, and so that makes me also want to ask, what brought the Atari VCS to your attention to develop a game for it?
I mean, really, um, I had vaguely heard that there was like an Atari box that was being developed or something or kickstarted,
Mhm.
and I kind of was like, okay, whatever, I was neither enthusiastic nor out gonna campaign on a hill to kill it or anything. It was just like, okay, well, we'll see what happens, whatever.
Mhm.
A friend of mine, Yanni, he actually contacted me and said, hey, um, game that I made for the Atari ST. I'm gonna port to the Atari VCS. And I was like, what? What's an Atari? What? And he's like, oh, it's the Atari box. It actually is real. You should check it out. So I got in touch with whoever was the contact at the time at Atari, and we had a brief call and talked about it. And I talked about, how I didn't want to just like dig in the archives and find my old games and like, I don't know, build some emulator or something. That wasn't really what I was interested in. At some point, actually, I will. There's a handful of games I did on the Atari 8-bit that got published through Antic, and some of them didn't get published. But at some point in my life, I will actually remake and do something with this. But I said, I want to do like new games with old DNA. Um, it's it's a thing that's in me. It's like I see and I play a lot of games, and I can sense when the person who made the game understands the mechanics. They understand the lineage of what they're making. When it comes to like people making retro games or even retro feeling games. And so that's part of the reason I started my own company, Retro Ninja. It's kind of called that because I love how retro games feel, but they're kind of rough. There's a lot of stuff we were learning back then, right? And when I look at modern games, I see a lot of choices that are made, but the people who are making the choices weren't in the room when the original choices were made. They don't understand why those choices were made. So they're like, oh, I'm just gonna make it Nintendo hard. And they don't understand why we made it Nintendo hard or whatever. So anyway, I looked at the VCS and said, probably going to be a community and a type of gamer that would be into what I'm looking to make, which is something like I said with old DNA, like you can play and it reminds you and feels like what you felt like when you were playing something older, from the 90s or even the 80s. But it's modern, so the edges are smoothed over a bit in the right places, creature comforts and things that we've grown accustomed to. So I got a dev kit, and then immediately, because Atari was really interested in a first-person platformer that I was working on, and that thing had evolved past being able, or at least at the time I thought it evolved past being able to be executed on the VCS hardware. Or at least that was my thinking at the time. Like it's right now it's kind of in the background, and it'll be on the Xbox first. But point being, I didn't want to spend a lot of time trying to make that game work on the Atari because again, like I said, at the time I thought, this machine's underpowered, so it won't be able to handle it. Let me build something from the ground up, and then that'll give me a chance to test and optimize and see how what can I really do on this machine. Well,
Right.
surprisingly a lot. If you actually approach things a certain way, you can do quite a bit. It's kind of, I would say it's a switch power level,
Okay.
but then in some ways it's actually better. Like it loads a hell of a lot faster and it has much higher fill rate. Fill rate is when transparent things are layered on top of each other.
Right.
The camera has to go, okay, I'm going to render this thing. Oh, I'm going to render this thing, and it's basically rendering a lot of pixels over and over again. That's called overdraw, and all of that takes time. Certain graphics cards are good at it. Certain ones they didn't think it was a big deal, and whatever. And
Right.
I assumed that the VCS was going to crumble under some of the stuff I threw at it.
If I may interject for just a second here, it's interesting that you say that because I've been kind of advocating for the VCS since it came out. I'm a full-time college student. I was very impressed when it first came out, and I started looking more and more into it. I'm not a coder, I'm not a developer, or anything of the sort,
Sure.
but even though that it's using somewhat of outdated specifications, it handles a lot more than people get it credit for. I've got it to run Unreal 4. I've been able to do emulation all the way up to Xbox 360. I mean, PlayStation 3 is a little, but I've done some emulation tests.
PlayStation 3 is a pretty brutal machine to begin with.
Yeah, but it can handle some PS2 games, not all of them, but it
Hmm.
can handle some of them. And I mean, it runs Wii like it's nothing. But again, don't want to advocate for emulation. But I have done some tests, and I
Hmm.
think that the more exposure that the VCS gets, the more people will realize, hey, maybe this isn't so chalked up to what people are saying, which is why I'm so positive about it, and why I also want to talk to the independent developers because you know, developing can have a lot of hurdles involved. You know what I mean? And one of the things that I'm curious about is how does this cater to other individuals? You did mention, and I'll say this statement real quick, and then I'll ask a question. But you mentioned before that they were interested in a first-person game that you were playing. I assume you're referring to Run Die Run Again. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, or RDRA for short, which takes some practice to say, but I've had a number of years to practice saying
Yeah.
RDRA. Um,
So,
yeah, they were interested in that one.
so you said that one's coming to the Xbox, but how hard do you think, and this is a question out of my own curiosity, how hard do you think it would be to create maybe a lower resolution port to the Atari VCS?
So yeah, like I said, I just assumed that it wouldn't run, so I didn't even try.
Hmm.
Um, and then one day, I have another game. I actually have I have so many things in the works. It's scary, but I have another thing, Chaos Chassis, which actually started life as a pitch to Atari for a combat update.
Okay.
Um, I won't get it. Yeah. So Chaos Chassis, this is kind of a divergent, but Chaos Chassis, when it stopped being a PvP only multiplayer thing, I was like, okay, I'll do a single player thing. I'll do like Vindicators, which is an Atari arcade top down tank shmup that they did. I can't remember. It was like it's in that era, the Return of the Jedi and stuff like that. So it must have been in the mid '80s. Anyway, point being, it's like okay, I'll use that as inspiration. And I was having trouble with doing co-op because co-op means if people decide to go in different directions, what do you do? Do you clamp the screen, all that fun stuff? And I don't really like clamping the screen because at some point I have to spend a lot of time managing layout so that people don't get trapped behind something, and all these issues. Um, so I said, let me try really quickly. I know it won't work. I know the machine can't handle it, but let me try really quickly and make split screen. So I did a split screen experiment. I dump it on the VCS. It works. It runs. Um, I'm not doing 60 frames while rendering two screens at the resolution and the kind of fidelity that I do, but I am doing 30, which actually wasn't bad at all. So at that point, I'm like, you know what? This machine, and then the explosions that I had were filling the screen with black smoke. So not only, I talked about the fill rate thing,
Right.
not only is layering things expensive, but it's cheaper if you're layering something that brightens the screen.
Okay.
Um, but if it's something that darkens, that is an expensive little calculation on some GPUs. So I noticed that this black smoke on two different screens, split screen, and all this stuff was not really hurting it too much. And it's like, wow, what really is going on in this machine? How hard can I push this machine? So I quickly slapped together. I didn't do any optimizations or anything. I just quickly slapped together a build of RDRA and sent it over to the Atari. And not the greatest, but by lowering the resolution of some things, textures and whatnot, I got it running at about 23 frames per second, which was surprising because I was certain that this very um, VFX post effects latent game was going to run probably 10, maybe. I mean, the hands on RDRA for your character are more polygons than your average BPM level.
Right.
And they're on screen all the time.
And
So
more.
getting 23 frames, I was like, wow. And then working through BPM and really with a smaller set of variables in BPM, I could really hone in on what works and what doesn't, what makes the machine want to scream at you and what it just eats up. So I'm pretty confident that a 30 frames RDRA wouldn't be a problem now that I've had enough experience with the machine. Like I said, it can do a lot more than you think. in BPM, except for some weird, some weird stalls I see. Um, and most people out in the wild haven't seen them, so it might just be me and my dev kit. It's a solid 60 frames all the way through, and it's doing things that you would not expect from an Atari VCS. If you don't know the machine, like
Right.
the entire world is curved. You can actually see underneath things and on top of things. It's this interesting thing that's doing in real time. The entire world being curved like that, and real time reflections, lots of lights, and it's um, it's doing a lot.
One of the things about BPM Boy, and I just want to go ahead and say is that first off, I do love the game a lot.
Okay.
Um, I think that it's visually impressive. I think that it's beautiful. I think the music is good. The controls are nice. I mean, it's definitely a very interactive game. And it's been a while. The VCS has needed a game like this for a while since it launched. I mean, of course, you had Gun Tech, you had Danger Scavenger and stuff like that, but we needed something like this. So that kind of leads me into my next question here. I just got a pop up saying that we're on our 10-minute mark. So we'll probably start a part two right after this. But um, I noticed that earlier in the last 24 hours, you posted on your Facebook page that the game itself was dedicated to your mother, which I did not know. And so I wanted to ask you what made you decide to create this game and dedicate it to your mom? And also, how has the reception been on the Atari VCS from those that have played it?
Okay. So I yeah, I was working on RDRA and kind of chaos chassis. And the I always tell everyone, who's a budding game developer, take your smallest idea, cut it in half, and then realize you're only going to do half of that. Um, and for people like me who have experience, I still say take your smallest game and cut it in half and cut it down again, because no matter what, your smallest idea just keeps ballooning. You're like, ooh, and this, ooh, and this, ooh, and this. And it takes a lot of discipline to not just ooh and this. My discipline um, throughout my career has come from things being time boxed by other people, producers and publishers going, this is your time, this line in the sand, this is what you get, right? So I got really good at working within, that time box that was given to me. Without someone giving it to you, then you're out in the wild again, right?
Right.
So these games, and it still happens, but these game ideas I have, you know, they get bigger and bigger. Uh, my mother passed away, and I just, I, I was just kind of thinking like, it's something that affects you no matter what. And I'm like sitting there thinking, oh, like, what am I doing? What's going on? Um, and like I said, my mother loved isometric games. Her favorite games were like Congo Bongo, Marble Madness, and Crystal Castles, not in that order actually. But I remember playing games like we go to the arcade, and she would take me, and I would play whatever was close nearby her, and she'd be playing her game, whatever, Crystal Castles or Marble Madness, and so she loved those games, and I just thought, you know what, I need to get something done. I need to get something done for the Atari, and um, I should, do something. I should do something that they don't have. And what don't they have? They don't have a roller. That's kind of what I call them. And I bet no one's doing a roller. Um, and my mother loved, my mother, like I said, loved Crystal Castles and Marble Madness, especially. So I was like, I could do Marble Madness. I could probably do Marble Madness in 6 months, easy, right? Maybe even less. Yeah. So it was great because it was cathartic to kind of like dive into this smaller thing that was more focused, and dedicated to my mother, and it grew. I mean, it literally like started life as Marble Madness, but looked kind of Tron Marble Madness. Um, and then it grew and it grew, and then uh I think the official time is 9 months, but that's not really real because that 9 months includes being sick and catching COVID, which took me down for 2 weeks. um my wife taking me, I say this like it was like she dragged me, but I don't vacation. But we went to Europe, Italy, for what was it, like 3 weeks or something. So it's really more like 7.5, 8 months, really. It's 7.5. But anyway, um, so it grew, like I said, but I decided to start with the simplest, simpler, more focused idea, and um, having kind of my mom in the background helped focus it too. It helped me go, yeah, you know what, this has to come out. This has to happen. Because it's dedicated to my mom, and that was a good motivator. And like I said, it was very cathartic to think that she would play this game, because I made lots of games, and I have family members. I have like sister and wife and kids. I have two sets of twins. I always want to make things that they want to play, but I don't always, timing wise and whatnot. I don't always get that chance. So this was like a chance to, make something that, I know my mother would play. Oddly enough, I have a grandson now, and that, he would play. My wife loves Marble Madness, and so, something she would play. And so that all kind of circles back to why I got into this to begin with. It's like I see this, I see these things in my head. I want to get it out, and I want to get it out into someone else's hands.
Right.
So
I don't want to interrupt. We're pushing
no,
the
no,
3 minute mark before this timer runs out for part one.
yeah.
So I just want to ask you one more chance. I mean, not one more chance, but once again, um, what was the general reception like for the Atari VCS in less than 60 seconds?
You mean for BPM on the VCS?
Absolutely. Like, what was people's reception like? What are some of the good, bad things that they've said?
Um, Reception has been really good. Overall, pretty great. Most people that have have beef with the game actually haven't told me. I've had to like really kind of drag out, that people don't like it, which is interesting. I don't know if that's just because the consensus is, we love it, that people who don't like it don't speak up. Or what that is. As far as criticism goes, I'm good with fair criticism. If somebody just wants to go, "What you made was crap," then I'm like, "Oh, well, how am I supposed to do anything with that?" But if someone says to me like, "I don't really like it because the timers give me stress," then it's kind of like I have to sit and evaluate, is that valid for most people? Is that really a thing? Is that a problem? Do I fix it? Because at the end of the day, I want everyone to play the game and to enjoy what they play, unless it's just not their thing at all. Then there's nothing I can do if you hate, rolling around like a little marble in a cute, colorful world. Like, go play Dark Souls. It's cool. It's fine. Um,
I love that. I'm sorry. That's funny. Um, okay, so we're running out of time, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording. I'm gonna send you another link so that way we can get part two in. I have 4 more questions that I want to ask you, and then you're free to go.
cool beans.
So I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview you. This is Kaz Denizon with Press Productions, and of course, this is Tony Barnes. Stay tuned for part two, guys. Thanks for watching. Here's my stop button. All right.